everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey there, it's me, Jackie.
And it's me, Diana. Hi.
Oh boy, everybody.
Intro. Diana, boring intro.
Was that boring? Jackie, your fan is doing like a slow-mo thing in the camera. Listeners is very excited to hear about the fan graphic you've got going. It's a real fan.
It's a real fan.
It's a real fan, but it sometimes slows up and sometimes
Guys, we have so many fans.
This is great, but this is not a podcast about amazing jokes. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss relevant research articles. Except we're not doing that this week. We're actually trying something a little bit different. So for folks who've been listening to the show for a little while, you'll know that we did an episode 268 called Discussion on Neurodiversity, where we talked about sort of how behavior analysts can be better at acknowledging, understanding, being humble, working with neurodiverse individuals. And as part of that, we realized that just by the three of us talking about that, we weren't exactly doing as much listening to a neurodiverse population. So we've been very fortunate that we have three individuals who are in the field of education and behavior analysis and who are neurodiverse, who we were very excited that they accepted our invitations to join us on what we're calling kind of a neurodiversity panel. So we have three guests on our panel, and we'll be doing some questions, some answers, some sharing. But before we do any of that, let's introduce our guests and our panel today. Why don't we start? Michelle, do you mind starting off with a quick introduction of who you are and
Sure.
a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Michelle LaFrance. I'm a BCBA and a special education teacher in Massachusetts. I'm in my third year in my public school that I've been working in, and I'm our safety care instructor. But I've done home-based public school clinics and collaboratives, and I've worked kind of all over the place in the field in the last 16 years.
Okay. Michelle, you're describing like the majority of my resume in your...
I love
it's a small world
Yep.
when it comes to this field. Alex, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so my name is Alex Estrella. I graduated from Vanderbilt University last year with my master's in special education and emphasis in ABA. I've been working as an RBT the last year, and I got all my hours, so about to take my BCBA exam. And thank you. I'm autistic myself and was diagnosed when I was 2. And yeah, so now I work with Autism Speaks. I work with our Autism Partnership Foundation, and yeah, excited to be here. Thank you.
Excellent.
Nice.
Wait,
Getting those hours is a huge accomplishment.
Such a weight off my. I mean, I know the exam's another hurdle, but still such a weight off my shoulders.
Oh, that's awesome.
Alex, I don't mean to like toot your own horn, but you should also talk about your production company.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, like, come on.
So in addition to doing behavior analysis work, I also am a documentary filmmaker. I recently made a film about Middle Tennessee's largest all-inclusive playground, and my company, Blue Star Productions, we kind of focus on empowering other neurodivergent filmmakers in the sphere. So I've been kind of combining my knowledge of behavior analysts and special education along with my documentary film background and kind of melding them together. So it's been been a very cool ride.
Excellent.
That's really cool.
And then last but not least, returning to the show, we have Brian. What have you been up to? You can, for folks who might not have heard your last episode, because it's been a while.
Yes, it's been a hot minute.
Please introduce yourself and share some updates.
So my name is Brian Middleton. I am an autistic ADHD or ADHD, if you will, BCBA. I actually worked for 7 years as a special ed teacher, 5 of it as the behavior specialist for a middle school, and absolutely loved it, with the exception of the interactions with administration because, reasons.
Yep.
And I became a BCBA, but before I actually sat for the BCBA exam, while I was going through my postmaster's certificate in ABA, I started this little page. Some know what it's called. It's called The Bearded Behaviorist. It's a joke, like most of my stuff, because I've got a very snarky sense of humor and I love puns. So I when you were talking about, Robert, this podcast isn't about great jokes. Why not both? Just
Exactly.
Why not
I
both?
mean, I don't want to toot. Jackie might toot other people's horns, but I don't want anyone tooting my horn. We think it's hilarious, but I don't want to be to bring it up too much. How hilarious we can be.
That's fair.
No.
But yeah, so the bearded behaviorist is there's an old saying, to beard the lion in its den, which means to address a problem directly. And so the bearded behaviorist, I chose that name because, one, I have luscious locks on my face, but also, two, because anybody can be a bearded behaviorist because we're addressing problems directly. That's exactly what behavior analysis is all about. So since we last spoke, I've been a keynote speaker in Ireland. I've done a lot of traveling. I think when we recorded our first podcast, I was living in Colorado Springs. I moved out to East Tennessee and actually have hung out a little bit at Vanderbilt. And then I relocated back to Southern Utah, and that's where I'm currently working as a clinical director, which is really exciting, especially because I get to put into practice from a directing leadership position the things that I've been learning and practicing and applying on a smaller scale. And so far, it's working really great. We're going to keep plugging along and keep taking data, right?
We'll check back in.
So part of kind of the series we're doing on neurodiversity is, both highlighting sort of, what does the research say? But more important than research is going to be what are the experiences of individuals who are working in ABA, who have been clients of ABA, who are just possibly tangential or have concerns with ABA. So we're going to be asking some questions kind of related to everyone's personal experiences. And of course, this is an open panel. So anyone who wants to share will be able to share as whatever information they think will help continue this discussion. So I'm kind of going to start off with if anyone who'd like to share a little bit about their personal experiences as neurodiverse, sort of their experience with neurodiversity. It could be personal or it could be neurodivergent. Sorry.
Yeah.
It could be, it could be personal. It could be, looking at it professionally, however you'd like to, kind of a broad question to start us off.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, just if it's okay, I just want to throw out this little primer on neurodiversity language because it really helps. And I'm sorry, Rob, I'm going to do actually.
It's fine. I don't, as long as you do the sound effect and the glasses to mime, it is allowed.
Okay, thank you. So neurodiversity is synonymous with biodiversity. So if you think of it from that perspective, it changes things a little bit. It's the diverse neurobiological types that we have within the species of humanity. So neurodiversity, we're in a neurodiverse environment right now. Everybody here present is a different neurotype. So neurotypical means typically accepted by society. So it's typically accepted, not typically developing. And then lastly, neurodivergent is typically diverging from the accepted norm. And that's critical because it's actually very behavior analytic in a very odd sort of way, in that and also not an odd sort of way, in that it's like it has to do with context because we're functionalists, we're contextualists, and we're selectionists. That's a critical part of being a behavior analyst. And so if we don't see how things operate within the function and context, then neurodiversity doesn't make sense. But if you look at it from the phylogeny, ontogeny, culture aspect, all of a sudden it opens everything up. And it makes it very much behavior analytic compatible. Sorry, I'm going to shut up and let Michelle go.
I was just going to say, I love your operational definition. But so I just wanted to add, I'm one of those women that was diagnosed really late in life. So I was 33 when I was diagnosed with ADHD, and that was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And then I was 35 when I was diagnosed with autism. Kind of knew it all my life, but just never really went through any of the testing for it. So I'm newish to all of this, but I've been in the field of ABA for 16 years. I did my certificate program and my master's and all my MTELs and my BCBA exam without any kind of diagnosis. It was so hard. I was one of those people that took the test 8 times and I passed in my 8th try. Yeah, it was not fun.
But not fun.
I did, or else I would have had to do the program again. Because you can't do more than 8 times. Fun fact. So I'm new to it, but, I'm one of the women, and there are a lot more of us in our 30s and 40s and even older that are starting to kind of get diagnosed. And, we were the quiet ones maybe in school because it was like 80s and 90s, maybe even before that, where ADHD and autism was just like little boys and who were hyperactive. And really, for me at least, it's more the hyperactivity is in my brain and it just never shuts up. So, yeah. And it just keeps doing that. Yep. You're agreeing with me. So that's...
Yeah. And then I guess for me, I was diagnosed when I was 2 years old, and I received ABA services actually starting in 1998. So obviously the field looks a lot different than it did back then. But, I am kind of I don't know. I don't know many others like me who got ABA services and are now kind of like working in the field. And I think, part of the reason I got into the field is because those services were so instrumental. I brought them up earlier, Autism Partnership based out in Seal Beach. They reached out to me not knowing that I was one of their clients way back in the day. And it was just a really cool kind of full circle of events. But yeah, no, I received services for 5 years. And, I wouldn't say like enjoyed it at the time, but my parents were successfully able to convince me that, they were babysitters and not like behavior technicians. And I didn't mind going to commute to my BCBA up in Seal Beach. So it's just been, it's been a really cool journey. And now kind of like, being a clinician myself and seeing kids who kind of resemble, my view kind of resemble myself when I was around that age. It's a really, awesome experience. Also, sorry, I'm in New York, so if you hear like sirens on my window in the background, just try to ignore it.
New York, that's what it sounds
Humble
like.
brag.
I know, should have gotten headphones, but anyway, yeah. So it's been a really, and I mean, to go to Vanderbilt University, like one of the most like prestigious universities for special ed, and getting accepted there was just kind of a blessing, really. And yeah, so now. Yeah, being in this position now and being almost becoming a BCBA, it's just really full circle. So,
and so for me, a little bit of background. I am also late in life diagnosed, and the late in life diagnosis came after I became a special ed teacher, worked with a lot of autistic kids, and went, wait, this was my childhood.
Yep.
Like all of this was my childhood. But interestingly, I was identified and I had a diagnosis of nonverbal learning disorder, which is the most common misdiagnosis for autistic boys in the 90s. And if you look at an NVLD and you do a side-by-side, there's a reason why I believe the DSM rolled it up into developmental delay. So I don't think it's actually available as a diagnosis anymore. So I was very lucky that my parents could homeschool me and that they were able to focus on the things that were of my interest. And so I got to explore and stuff like that. I had a nickname of Babu of the Jungle because I would go out and spend almost as much time as I humanly could with animals, dogs, goats. We had guinea pigs, all sorts of stuff. We didn't have chickens, strangely, but like it was on an acre piece of property, and our property was on the back of this giant. And so we would jump the fence and run down to the creek, and I'd stare at the turtles and other animals in the water for hours and hours at a time, and just stim out on it. And I didn't know that's what it was called. Like it was just that was it. And then I was able to just be me and pursue my interests and then develop that way. So I got my education degree, undergraduate, and I dual certified as a special ed teacher. So I'm a social science composite, which means I can teach at the high school level, political science, sociology, economics, geography, psychology, and history. And my biggest brag, this is much bigger than passing the BCBA exam, because that's a hard exam. But I passed the social science composite exam on the top 10% in the entire nation.
Woo.
And that
Nice.
covers everything, like any of those 6 subjects it covers in that exam. So I'm like, that. I think that's a bigger brag than the BCBA exam. Just saying.
I'm never going to pass anything in the top 10%. So anytime you say anything above,
There's got to be something.
They're all very impressive accomplishments.
I'm very friendly. That's what I got going for me.
But I got my postmaster's certificate from University of Cincinnati, and frankly, I was very frustrated by it because it felt like a degree mill, and because I'm the sort of person where it's like there's no half measures for me. Like I'm either not interested or all in. So like I've made behavior my special interest, I guess you could say. And it makes kind of sense, because if you look at the social science composite degree, which I've always loved history, that's just looking at the permanent products of behavior, right?
Yeah.
So like I like to jokingly say I was born a behavior analyst. But yeah, like when I was a special ed teacher, I worked with all these kids, and the magic I worked was that I treated them like people. I treated them like the way I wanted to be treated as a kid. And I still came across struggle points where we just couldn't get past it. And so I looked for resources and tried very hard to figure out how to help my kids. And I came across this. I went to this little regional autism conference, which I actually spoke at this last month. So it's kind of a nice full circle. But the keynote speaker was just saying all the things that were just fascinating me. And so I asked the question. I went up and asked her like what was going on. And I basically spent the rest of the conference just talking to her and skipped everything else. And at the end, she said, "Have you thought about becoming a BCBA?" And I said, "A BCB what?" And she said, "A BCBA." And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm NGWA. That stands for not good with acronyms. Could you tell me what that means?" Literally said that, by the way. I had that one loaded. But that was the beginning of the beginning. So now you have will owe me.
So, everyone here has worked either in education or worked directly with sort of clients in like clinical, in ABA. What about sort of your and Brian, you're gonna have to correct me if I'm using it wrong, because now you've got me all thinking I think I'm overthinking the terms. So.
Sorry.
But neurodivergence, what sort of strengths has that brought to, or you think, what about that has enhanced your work? Whether you're thinking about it as just sort of you and your personality, whether it's your learning history and things that you learned sort of not to do through your own sort of development in education in the past. But I kind of love to hear sort of what are some of the real things you found to be beneficial that have made you do the job better.
So I can start with that. So in a lot of my classrooms, so I'm a consultant and I work for public school, but I'm essentially a consultant. There are so many kids that have like sensory issues that I also have, because I am also diagnosed with misophonia, which is just like really sensitive to different sounds. And one big thing that I do that I bring to it is that I know, like, these things might be really difficult. Let's put in some kind of antecedent intervention and let's prevent it somehow when other people don't even notice it. And I've seen that make a big difference. And just doing a lot of the preventative stuff that I walk into a room and I see and I'm overwhelmed, or it, just difficult for me to be in a room, and then working with the teachers and working with everybody to work on that environment and antecedent prevention kind of things. So like loop earplugs, or in my office I have the clouds that cover my giant lights that I absolutely hate. Just little things like that, and we're just making it more normal in every single classroom.
Yeah, I think kind of for my personal style, or how being neurodivergent has affected my being a practitioner and doing treatments. Like at the clinic I was just at, works with a lot of more higher, I know there's kind of some debate right now, but I still call it like higher functioning kiddos. And a lot of the time, they would get frustrated, and it brought me back to a time where, even though I hadn't thought of that memory in 20 years or so, it brought me back to a time where I was receiving services and excuse me, got upset too. And so I just tried to the way you would break it down to a 7-year-old, be like, hey, I went through something really similar, just trying to kind of what Brian said earlier too, like just trying to treat them like they're human and be like, I have this unique perspective where I'm able to relate to some of these exact experiences. And, a lot of times you're like, what, really? Like you had a therapist too? And, I'm like, yeah, I did. And it's just really cool to have that shared connection with these kiddos and have these conversations. It doesn't always diffuse the situation, but I think it gives some perspective, at least, in the short term, and also seeing breakthrough moments as well. I mean, I know every clinician breakthrough moments are just incredible. It's like almost an indescribable feeling. But, I think seeing some of the kiddos I worked with and those breakthrough moments, like again, it almost kind of brings me back to some of the really like the, high moments I had when I received treatment. And to see that, to be on the other side of that now it's something really special and something I don't take for granted. So I think that's what's given me a unique edge, if you will.
And is it okay if I add something? So I also do supervision for people that are pursuing their BCBA credential. And I specifically pick people that are neurodivergent or have like test anxiety or something like that, because it was so hard for me to do it without that. And I, obviously passing on my 8th try, I did like every single thing that you can think of to try to pass it. And so taking that into consideration and using a lot of different programs and a lot of different things that I learned along that way to help other people that are in my situation really, really is beneficial. And I have 100% pass rate, but I've only done 4 of them. So
still pretty good.
Congrats.
Yeah.
That's very good. It can't be better, actually.
Right.
I'd say the advantage that comes with my neurotype is pattern recognition and information pulling. I think it's one of the reasons why I had such a hard time as a kid, is because there was just so much. And in fact, I'd say probably my first 8 to 9 years of life were fairly disassociated. I didn't know what that was called. I just called it fuzzy. But I was highly disassociated, and it was very, very difficult for me up to a certain point. And then the patterns started clicking. And I'm very good at picking up on patterns and identifying them. And then, of course, the challenge that comes from that is that, we all want to be right. So therefore, if the pattern is maybe it's logical in that it looks like it connects, but it doesn't necessarily, because correlation isn't always causal, right? So the challenge came from having to be flexible with my pattern recognition and learn how to learn, basically. And so I think that really has helped, because now it's less about me being right and more about me knowing the perspective. Because a lot of times when we're arguing whether something is right or wrong, actually we're arguing perspective.
Yep.
Well, I know you've all spoken about a number of struggles, sort of, either in early life or as you were getting started in the field. I'd be curious, kind of the flip side of the last question. Are there things that you find to be trying, or that you have found that you've struggled with or needed to come up with, systems or organizational tricks to sort of help you get through certain situations in your kind of day-to-day work in the field?
Yep.
Would I be able to take this one first?
Please.
Go for it, Brian.
Okay. My biggest struggle is the requirement for me to be empathetic for everyone else, but the lack of willingness to be empathetic back to me. And it's gotten to the point now where I know what's going on and I can spot it. And I'm in a position of authority where I can actually flip those dynamics, because I see it happening. And I've actually done this with multiple employees, where I'm seeing the pattern of the double empathy problem, is what it's called, where whether they know it or not, they're probably neurodivergent, and they're experiencing some sort of discrimination. I know it's a hard word to hear, but that's what it is. And I've been able to be a part of the leadership and interrupt that cycle and redirect to being truly behavior analytic. In that it's like, okay, is this a matter of can't or won't? Okay, if it's a matter of can't, then we need to work on skills. If it's a matter of won't, then that means that there's something happening in the environment that's a barrier to that person, and we need to accommodate it. And it's changed everything, because instead of it being a guilt, shame, control cycle, instead of it falling into mentalism of, oh, well, they're just not fit for this job, it's more along the lines of, oh, okay, yeah, we can make that happen. And again, becomes more behavior analytic, but it's very much a challenge, and it's one that almost without fail peers have reported. But maybe I should stop talking and let my peers report.
So I have 2 parts to mine, my struggles. I'll start what do you call it, temporally in a timeline, whatever. So like when I was going, when I was at Vanderbilt, a lot of, especially the ABA classes I took, at that point, I wasn't public about my diagnosis. Only like my friends and close family knew. So a lot of my cohort, all my people in my cohort didn't know, there was like an autistic person in the room, and so like and there would be like certain lectures or certain presentations where I wanted to speak out so badly, but, I just knew it like wasn't the time or place. And I knew I wanted to, eventually I would like kind of be more public with it. But at that point, especially in regards to stuff of like early treatment and, I wanted to, it was just so hard for me to like kind of repress it, even though I wanted to talk so badly about like, well, actually, kind of there were especially like a lot of the, here's how you should do. And it's like, I wanted to give my side of it. But so that was hard. I mean, it wasn't eating away at me per se, but it was hard to like, want to bring in these like personal anecdotes or people like asking questions of like, oh, how would like an autistic person react to this? And it's like, I could answer, but, I can't right now. So that's like part of it. I'd say another struggle has been, and I'm sure, everyone goes through this, but for me particularly, like the last clinic I was at, having, kind of like having those like really just tiring days, where it's like it's a rough day. And again, everyone throughout all walks of life goes through it. But, I think especially when you're dealing with a lot of like challenging behaviors over the course of 8 hours, you just want to like drink a beer and watch the NBA or something, right? And, having like neurotypical peers and kind of seeing them like being more willing to debrief about things or, and I know like part of that was just like the camaraderie that had been through like years of like working together and stuff. But it's like, I think part of being autistic, it's like, I just felt like an outsider, not really knowing how to like kind of like go into like break into those conversations. And, because I think that's a big pivotal part is like, telling people like when you're not okay, like when, something, just self-advocating, especially for somebody who's autistic. And so, I'm still learning how to navigate that. I think though, even in the last year, I've gotten better at being like, okay, if, I think of this as being an uncomfortable situation, I'm still going to say it, because if I don't say it at all, then nobody's going to know. So I think just like learning how to speak up, has been a big thing. And, I guess that relates back to my first thing about, when I was in the classroom. So be like self-advocacy in general has just been a learning curve over the last 5 years or so.
So I'm kind of surprised it took this long to get to this, but social cues, like I miss them all the time, especially with like administration, with parents, through emails. I absolutely suck at that. And I know that. And it is so hard for me sometimes to like pick up on that people are, not liking a behavior plan so much, or like not wanting to give as much information, or even if they like it, I have raging RSD sometimes. And so rejection sensitive dysphoria, like that is the hardest part for me, for sure.
Honestly, Michelle, I totally agree with that. Sometimes, like, especially I'm from California, my lingo is like, oh, dope, rad, like that's what I use. It's like, even in a professional setting, I'll still use it. And it's sometimes hard. No, I mean, it's happened when I've been like with parents and like, I'm trying to work with the child and they're telling me something. So it get pretty serious incident. I'm like, oh, okay, dope. And then I'll catch myself. I'm like, oh, shit. like I just totally said rad because it's like, but yeah.
Let's bring it back. Come on.
I like rad. That's cool. I think it's cool.
I think that's dope.
I mean, at least dope. It's like, it could be worse. And it makes for like, now in hindsight, it's kind of funny, but yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Northern California, so like sweet was a big thing. So I think that's sweet.
So I want to pull our kind of discussion a little bit broader for kind of the next question. So we're all working in the field of ABA and education. What do we think the field is doing well in terms of supporting our neurodiverse clients, and flip side, not so well? And if you want to, how we could do better. But we can save that for another question as well, so it doesn't get too muddled at once.
It's a big question you just asked.
It's a big question.
Well,
Why? That's my question.
I want to give, my first one would be a shout out, because there are a lot of people that are autistic, are neurodiverse, that are trying to kind of change the field from within. And when I think of some of the big ones, I'm not going to lie, I was a little intimidated that I was on a podcast with you, Brian, because mindful behavior and Beard Behaviorist and like all of those big ones are really pushing it.
Hey, Michelle, I'm human. I poop too.
No, I know that. But, I'm just like this little podunk BCBA from like Massachusetts. Like there's a million of us here. So like
stop. You're stealing from my resume, Michelle. Stop.
But there are definitely these bigger groups that are kind of changing the field from within, and there are more people that are trying to get more autistic and neurodivergent and ADHD and whatever BCBAs in the field. And there are so many people that are doing such great work from inside. And I love that those groups exist, and that I'm seeing a lot more people that are coming up through the ranks that have unique perspectives like this, which is fantastic.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
Hey, everybody. Just wanted to pause our panel discussion for a quick moment to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening to the show, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then click the link in the podcast player description or go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to enter in some key information, including 2 secret code words. And since we have such an august panel of guests today, we also have some guest secret code words. And the first one is Shrek. SHREK, like the green ogre that is still popular for some reason, even though that movie is like super old at this point, right? You know, I'm Shrek and I'm an ogre.
Shrek.
That's a bad Shrek impression I'm doing. Yours is pretty good. Yours is actually better than mine. Anywho, Shrek. All right, let's get back to our panel discussion.
Like what you were saying, Michelle, like I just so you know, mindful behavior isn't that big. We're trying, like,
I know,
and we're struggling because we've actually been dealing with quite a few attacks from some very large and well-funded organizations who have come after us. So because we're affecting their bottom line. That's an unfortunate reality. I even had the privilege of being cited in a paper this year out of context. And unfortunately, many of that was the worst part for me. But there were others who had their privacy violated. Thankfully, the paper Scrolling in the Trouble was removed. It wasn't withdrawn; it was outright removed for violating research ethics. But unfortunately, that organization has doubled down on their behavior and is actually causing additional harm and has actually affected a couple of my peers because they've been uninvited from stuff. So that's a real issue, but let's start with the positives though. Sorry. So like there's folks like, I don't know if you've heard of Unfurling Littles, but Maggie is amazing. And there's a lot of other folks who are modeling and demonstrating these skills. Jersey Behavior, that's my friend Mary. We became friends because she reached out and wanted to figure out how to do things better, and she's fantastic. There's folks who are doing amazing research. Dithu Rajaraman is at Vanderbilt. And he trained under Greg Hanley and is the researcher behind Enhanced Choice. And my clinic, we're actually working on putting together a research proposal and going through IRB to be able to do some research on Enhanced Choice, which is really fantastic. I will say Greg Hanley's work in PFASBT, or My Way, for those who are not familiar with the acronym, which stands for Practical Functional Assessment Skills-Based Training. Took a lot of practice to remember that one. But
he changed it a lot too, like over the years in like short chunks of time.
So many acronyms.
And I will say, like, that's a good start. Like, note what I said there. I didn't say it's great. It's not neurodiversity affirming. It's a good start. And and I regularly have people coming to me being like, well, is this procedure neurodiversity affirming? Is this one neurodiversity aligned? And my answer is almost without fail, no. And the reason why is because neurodiversity affirming or aligned is an attitude. It's an attitude that actually was introduced a little while back. You may have heard of it, social validity. Social validity is the possibility of being aligned with neurodiversity affirming or aligned approach, because social validity starts with the individual and moves outwards. It starts with the individual's rights, and then it looks at how the individual interacts with the environment, and it tries to identify the rights and the struggles that are happening there, and then it goes out to the community that that individual belongs to, and then the greater society. And so, like, social validity is the only thing in behavior analysis that is more likely to be neurodiversity aligned, because everything else is just a technology. And my favorite example of this is I've had people say to me, like, well, extinction is not ethical. And I said, what do you mean? An example. The example is of a learner that I worked with who was going through puberty, and it's very natural for what he was going through. But the thing that was not natural was he wanted to grab the chests of the ladies that he was working with. And the answer was 100% definitively, no, that's not acceptable. We can go do something else. We can get some sexual education training if you want. We can do all sorts of variety of other things. We can go do a different activity. But as soon as you violate that woman's rights, then that's a no-go. And that is an example of ethical extinction. But the way that extinction predominantly is applied is unfortunately not ethical, because we don't take into account the phylogeny of the person. And as a rule, I say extinction by itself is a signal that you might be going into unethical territory, because really we should be going for differential reinforcement. But that's a different story.
Right. And you have to teach us skill with it.
Yeah. And so that's like, what are we doing well? We're evolving as a field. Are we taking a while to do it? Yeah. Are we a little bit behind the curve compared to others? Probably, most definitely. I think it has a lot to do with money. And it has a lot to do with the paradigm that we tumbled into, which is the pathology paradigm, which is we're going to be talking about a little bit in upcoming questions. So I'm going to shut up.
For me, I think this kind of ties into what Brian was saying about, and Michelle, like, differential reinforcement. And a big thing, I don't have as much like scientific evidence to go off of, but when firsthand, when I witnessed like the children I'm giving services to, like engaging in highly reinforcing activities or with highly reinforcing items, I think, that's something that I think, and it's not necessarily ascertained specifically to neurodivergent individuals, but I think, my own experience, right, like growing up, and my reinforcer was trained. Like, I still love model trains. I love life size trains. Like, I still get off to that shit all the time. And it's like seeing that, almost each kid I work with has something like, for me, trains, right? That is just so like rewarding. And it's like, I know it can't be incorporated into every like work demand or every, routine, but there's some treatment plans where I'm like, why don't we, we know that this is so highly motivating, so highly reinforcing. Like, why don't we incorporate? There should be like more incorporation of it, right? And maybe there's some skills to be taught around that. It's like not everyone sure will become like a train engineer or conductor, but it's like there's still, I think, if we like kind of play into some of these treatment plans, like, and tailoring them more to like that highly reinforcing activity or item, maybe it teaches some career life skills down the line. I think that's something that could greatly be improved upon. I also think, and a lot of people come up to me and they're like, oh, so because you're like, an ABA success, like it's got to be the way, right? I'm like, I don't think it's always the way. I think, I think for me, ABA has worked great for the kids. Obviously the kids I work with, I think it's doing incredible things, but I think there needs to be a heavier focus on, and it can be intertwined with ABA, but like play-based therapy, music-based therapy. I think for some kiddos, adolescents, adults, that's like more beneficial, like incorporating. And again, I think that goes back to like the highly preferred, highly motivating objects. So for some people it is music, for some people it is like, more tactile than typical ABA clinic allows for. And I think, so I'm not, I totally agree with some people. It's like, I get it. I think I'm actually, I did a documentary recently where we focused on like all the skills that are like learned in a playground setting. And if that child like maybe doesn't do well in ABA clinic, but if they're able to, if conversation and social peer interactions are facilitated through a playground, why not? I don't think there's any reason for a clinic, or I mean, not clinic, but an organization set up that just works at the playground, and just kind of like lets kids do their things and jumps in when needed. But I think not that the clinic space doesn't work, it totally does, but I think there needs to be like a wider variety of options that can incorporate ABA aspects, but don't have to be centered in like an office setting.
Well, and what you're getting at, Alex, that's actually like what the research is supporting, and the thing that I get a little bit frustrated with the ABA field is that like there's often this that's mentalism, that it's and I've even given it a name. I call it a thought terminating tact, where they're tacting something so that they can stop thinking about it, which is in its own way, it's a mentalism. And like, I'm like, but we're behavior analysts. When we have a parent come in and describe a behavior to us and they're saying, well, they did it because, and they insert some explanation that they've come up with, we don't go, well, that's an explanatory fiction. You're out of here. Right. It's like,
wait, we're not supposed to do that. Oh God. Oh no.
It's like, this is not a baseball game. It was not 3 strikes, you're out. It's like, we have a behavior science, right? A science, right? And so we're trying to identify what's happening. And so when we're working with other therapists, when we're working with equine therapists, when we're working play therapists, when we're working with all these different groups, instead of being like, well, that's mentalism, what's wrong with you? It should be, well, hey, occupational therapists, you talk about sensory processing. Behavior analysis has to do with stimulus, sensory stimulus, phylogeny, ontogeny. Oh, hey, guess what? We have a lot in common. And then of course it's like, well, there's some people who are like, well, that's their base theories are mentalistic. It's like, and like what are they doing this right? Okay, so how can we shape them to be able to spot the things? And then what can we learn from them? Because we actually have a very wonderful history of taking from other sciences and learning from them. In fact, I forgot to mention one of my favorite advancements in our field, and it's actually a kind of a rehash almost, but also it's taking to the next step, and that's nonlinear contingency analysis. And Israel Golddiamond, and Israel Golddiamond drew heavily from applied mathematics. And we even have a branch of behavior analysis right now that's drawing from theoretical physics. If you've heard of relational density theory.
Yes.
That's super cool. It's like, it's being like, oh, hey, theoretical physics, relational frame theory, how can we make these mash up to help us to identify whether or not a person is actually being discriminated against? We now have hard number ways of measuring discrimination. It's pretty cool.
And I also just want to talk, like you or Alex were talking about, reinforcement and all of that kind of stuff, but it also goes back to developmental appropriateness. So we often are asking these kids to do so much more than is developmentally appropriate for them at that age, especially when you're looking in early childhood and the Lavoisian methods of 30 to 40 hours a week. That's just not appropriate for a little kid. And then some of the stuff that we're asking them to do, like, yeah, they're in preschool, and yeah, maybe it is the next skill that's on the ABLES or on like some kind of assessment, but they shouldn't be able to tie their shoes at a certain age, and they shouldn't be able to like do these things that we're then asking them to without knowing that it's not appropriate. But I think that schools, like universities, are doing a much better job from what I've seen with my students, my like BCBA students, in looking at the developmental appropriateness, and then also looking at more like neurodivergency affirming kind of things in these classes, which is fantastic to see and fantastic to be hearing when I'm talking to them in supervision.
And I think that has a lot to do with paradigm.
Yeah.
And like, for those who don't know the word, paradigm is referring to a model or pattern that's followed. So, for example, a really good example of paradigm that is not related to behavior analysis per se is the heliocentric paradigm versus the pterocentric paradigm. So up to a certain point, philosophers and mathematicians thought that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything rotated around it. And all of the research supported it. Everything that they did researching it supported that. And then Galileo shows up and is like, actually, and shows us the heliocentric paradigm, which is the Earth revolves around the sun and that there's revolving bodies out in the universe. And then all of a sudden, the data that was being dismissed was starting to make sense. And what you described, Michelle, was like a shift from the pathology paradigm to what I would call the functional contextualist paradigm, which includes neurodiversity.
Yep.
Because it's shifting our look, instead of being like person with autism, pathologizing language, versus autistic person, like as in that's a part of my identity. And there's some people who are like, what's this a big deal? And I'm like, it is a big deal though, because Lovaas said indistinguishable was the goal. So Lovaas basically said, oh, it's only ontogeny, blank slate. This isn't actually what he said, but this is like me summarizing it into a very simple soundbite.
Yeah.
But it's just like, oh, it's ontogeny. Everything else we ignore. And we're going to make this kid indistinguishable because autism is a disorder and we need to fix it. We're going to treat it like a disease. And like, I know I like Greg. I've mentioned I like Greg Hanley, but one of my criticisms of Greg Hanley is how much he focuses on stimming instead of being like, oh, hey, maybe we need to just like treat the person like a person. and like, not to say that he doesn't, like he does, and he is a compassionate caregiver. But the problem is that I have to spend so much time soothing people about whether or not they're kind or compassionate when I'm pointing out that they're using a system, an attitude, an approach, a paradigm that's harmful. And that's frustrating. And you see that same thing in anti-racism work. You see that same thing in women's rights work, in queer rights work. The reality is that up until the 1970s, the vast majority of the research for queer folks was in the pathology paradigm. And it was only when practitioners said, no, we're not accepting it, we're rejecting this completely, we're not going to use this anymore, and we're going to insist that anybody who engages in this type of behavior is not accepted in our community, only then did we see the shift. And yet in our field today, we still have organizations that push pathology paradigm. And like in 2023, Justin Leaf gave a speech and he concluded that the goal was indistinguishable, and he got a standing ovation at Cal ABA. Mm-hmm. And that's still a problem. And it's like, I want to call people in, I want to invite them to see things differently, but we got to look at why the behaviors were selected for. And the behaviors were selected for because money, it's reinforcement. It's why is this sustaining? Why is this still a thing? And it's because the autism industry is very, very, very lucrative, and it's difficult to change models. And to Alex's point, like, we need to shift our model. We need to start incorporating these things because we have natural environment training. Like that's like we have the research to support it. Why are we not doing it?
Yep. And I will say, so I was just at Mass ABBA like a few weeks ago, and I went to a neurodiversity affirming practice session thing by Cass Bro, who's amazing. And one of the big things that they said was to make ABA as our field so much fun, like that everybody else is just going to want to join. So like, don't work on getting those people to change their views because it's never going to happen, or very unlikely to happen. Make our part of the field where we are doing a lot of those like affirming practices and all of that, make it so much more reinforcing to want to be in this part of the field than in the like old school kind of thing, which I thought was fantastic.
I love Cass. Cass is a wonderful human, and I'm going to disagree with them.
Oh, okay.
Because I think it's a yes and.
Okay.
I think it's a yes. We have to make it enjoyable, and we need to fight for how we change and do things. Because the reality is that it's normal for a child to be having a meltdown, which is not the same as a tantrum, and for people to just stand there and watch it happen instead of engaging in contingency analysis and identifying what's going on. It's normal for behavior analysts to say, well, not to be mentalistic, but in neurology, what? Like, neurology is our sibling science. Neurology proved us right. Like, neurology proved that Skinner's hypothesis that thoughts, feelings, emotions, internal events are real. So, and in fact, they're a science of observation, description, and explanation, and we're a science of observation and description. So we should be working with neurologists actively. And in fact, in experimental analysis of behavior, we do.
Yep. Yeah.
So I want to make sure we have enough time to talk a little bit about kind of the future, what comes next. And all of you either, Alex, you're just finishing up your kind of supervision period. One check down. And then Michelle and Brian, you both, have supervised a number of people. And of course, we have all done our supervision in the past, but, maybe focusing more on the supervision. So sort of thinking about the next generations of BCBAs, of clinicians working in ABA, I'd love to talk about some kind of thoughts you have on the matter of what you try to focus on in your supervision that either might not be as readily apparent in the curriculum that some of your supervisees might have gotten in grad school, or areas where you feel your experience is going to give them a different perspective in how to practice ABA that, again, they might not have gotten just from the current crop of textbooks or the current crop of professors.
So I would say I really heavily, from the beginning, talk about ethics and talk about the history of ABA and where it came, and, everything that's gone wrong in ABA, or everything that maybe got us to a certain point and is now, just like Brian was saying, we're looking at that science differently, and we're looking at how to change that, but why and what happened, and all of the stuff leading up to where we are now is really, really important and is not always talked about. And I definitely incorporate that a lot right from the beginning.
So one of the first things that I do with my supervisees is we have a conversation about degrees of freedom, which is Israel Gold Diamond, and degrees of coercion. And the first question I ask, and it really makes them uncomfortable, and so this is a part of it, is being uncomfortable and being okay with being uncomfortable, is I ask, is what we do coercive? And I let them sit with that, and they have a conversation, and pretty consistently the answer comes back as yes. and that is indeed the correct answer. What we do is coercive, because the
education.
The environment that we live in is coercive. And for those who don't know, degrees of freedom is the number of choices minus one. So if you hold up two fingers, there's a little dip between your fingers. That's 1 degree of freedom. If you have 3 fingers up, then there's 2 dips. That's 2 degrees of freedom, so on and so forth. And coercion is like, is there really choice? And the example I like to use for this example is, if I present to you 99 dishes, and every single one of them except for one has shellfish in it, and you have a shellfish allergy, you're vegan, vegetarian, Muslim, or Jewish, do you really have a choice? Or is that coercive? And we have to ask this question because the answer is yes. And the answer is what we do is yes, coercive. And so how do we minimize coercion? How do we address the issues that we're dealing with? How do we make it so that there is more freedom and more choice? Because really, if you break behavior analysis down to its bare bones, we're trying to teach kids how to recognize when there's an SD present so that they can make choices, so they can have freedom. So they can discriminate when there's their reinforcement available and when there isn't, so that way they can have more opportunities to pivot towards what that matters to them. That's the heart of behavior analysis, and that's the heart of education. And in fact, behavior analysis did not start off as a clinical science; it started off as an educational science. Mm-hmm. And everything that Skinner did, and everybody up to a few folks before Lovaas, but Lovaas and that crew was informed by how do we learn. Even the early autism research wasn't like how do we fix autism? It's how do autistic kids learn? That's it. That was it. That was the entire gist of it. And then because it was more lucrative to go with the pathology model, we went that direction, even though there was a lot of resistance. And in the history of our field, there were actually screaming matches between people over going this route. And unfortunately, that route won out, but we have the ability to change direction. The other thing that I do with my supervisees is I require them to read Neuroqueer Heresies, which I linked in the chat, so you have the link for it, and Unmasking Autism, which I'll drop the chat in once I'm done talking because I have a hard time talking and writing at the same time. But in both of those, these people who wrote these books, Nick Walker and why am I blanking on the name of the author for
Devon
Price. There we go. So Nick Walker and Devon Price, they're both very critical of behavior analysis. They're very much do not like behavior analysts. And the reason why I want people to read their books is because despite the fact that, and because of the fact that they're critical, so despite and because, they offer some amazing perspectives and feedback. They offer some amazing ways of looking at things. And in fact, Nick Walker herself, she is one of the founding researchers behind neurodiversity. And so she does a very good job of breaking down what it is and why it matters. And, I could all day, well, they don't understand behavior enough, and have this superiority complex, or I can say, you know what, they specialize in what they specialize in. How can I take the feedback that they're giving and apply it? And for Devon Price's book, their description of ABA is way off because they're describing early Lovaasian research and Judge Rotenberg Center. And yet, like, why? Why is it that their description of ABA is those things? And that goes back to the question of like, well, okay, as a field, are we going to be mentalistic and say, oh, well, they just don't understand? Or are we going to try to deep dive into understanding and realize that, oh, maybe these people who are offering criticisms are also offering us information that helps us to improve? And a part of improvement is acknowledging that maybe we screwed up and then turning around. So that's my yes and.
Alex, I know you're just wrapping up supervision, and I don't want to put you in the awkward position of putting any of your supervisors on blast for, I wish they'd done this because it really drove me nuts. However, ethically, they should be already asking for that feedback from you. So if there is anything that you're thinking, I wish this had been this way, I'm sure you've given them that feedback. I'm sure they've asked for that feedback, I hope. But again, thinking into the future when you will likely be supervising BCBAs, either formally or sort of informally in a role, is there anything that kind of your recent experience in supervision kind of leads you to think, I think this needs to be done differently in the future?
Yeah, I think two things come up for me, and I guess they both kind of tie into each other. The first thing for me, and this is across across like all clinics I've worked at, and I've heard from other clinics, so it's not specific to anyone or any organization, but I think just focusing more on the positives. A lot of I think as supervisors, as BCBAs, you tend to, and whenever you're coaching somebody, right, you get caught up in like okay, I would do this, or I would do, a lot of corrective feedback. And I think what is like missing and needs to be stressed more is like when you're doing something right, it needs to be the praise. The praise element has to be like emphasized more, because as any human, you like hearing positive things. You like hearing like, even if you have, hypothetically, you have an RBT who's like really screwing up, right? Like, or just like is kind of out of their element. Just find and then you can have like a later debrief. Like, I guess what I'm talking about right now is like in the moment feedback, right? You can have a later debrief where if you need, there's ethical concerns or what, but in that moment, try to find something positive, because I guarantee, like, when it does come to that like conversation, like a more formal conversation, or when it comes to like, what I was going to earlier, like self-advocacy and an RBT needing to speak up, like, hey, it's not really, this isn't clicking or whatever. If you give that like positive feedback, that'll like, is the same thing with our clients, that will build rapport, that will increase their comfort level, hopefully not with only you, but the organization. And yeah, I think, it's essentially the same thing, building a rapport with your clients is like, I think it's essential to, and it doesn't, I want to, not everyone's going to be, I've learned throughout life, like, you're not going to be best friends with everybody, right? Your coworkers, your supervisees, you're not going to click all the time. You're not going to be like best buddies, and you're not going to go get a drink every weekend, right? But still finding those points of overlap, again, finding the commonalities, what I try to do with all my clients and their families as well. Because when you do find those commonalities, I think it facilitates those harder discussions, if those harder discussions are needed. And kind of my second point too is just kind of like, I guess like ties into that, like companies I've been at will like do the shout outs or the awards or whatever. And it's kind of hilarious because it brings me back to like high school. It's like the popularity, like, a popularity contest, right? And it's like, and I think, everyone should get, maybe not an award, not everyone gets an award, but it's like everybody should get a shout out for something. I remember, I will say, like, my supervisor recently, like, just put up Post-it notes for everyone in the clinic, like on our walls for like the toys. And it's like, that's awesome. And that's including, it's being inclusive of like everybody. And I find so many times it's like the shout outs only like, or only like, it's the same people every other week and stuff, right? But if you find a way to like to shout out everybody for like something cool they did, like in a situation or something you're doing great across the board, again, that's going to like boost their like morale. It's going to boost their self-esteem. And, as an organization, I would think it would like lead to like, lower, I know in the field of behavior analysis, especially with RBTs, the turnover rate is so high. You're able to make them feel included and, make them feel valued, which again, like I think there's a lack of. I think that's what I want to do, at least on an individual level, when I become a supervisor. And if that, can have like ripple effects throughout whatever organization I end up, I think that'll be great, because at the end of the day, everyone, not just the kiddos themselves, but I think all the employees want to feel valued and welcomed as well.
It always boggles my mind that as a field, we have organizational behavior management, and we don't use it in a lot of our clinics, and we don't use it in most schools or anything. We know that the science is there to support that stuff works, but we just don't do it. And it's lack of time, lack of money, lack of whatever, but it's there. We can.
And honestly, one of my favorite examples of organizational behavior that you actually touch a little bit on, Alex, comes from the book Pro-Social, which is Hayes, Atkins, Wilson. It's an OBM book, but it's written for everybody. And I cannot recommend it enough, because it goes into something called core design principles. And in core design principles, which was actually identified by, shocker, not a behavior analyst, an economist, Elinor Ostrom, who she won the Nobel Prize for her work in core design principles. But like it's 8 core critical principles that, when present in any organization, the organization thrives, the individual thrives. And that the research has actually shown, I'm going to do a little spoiler, that it doesn't matter what your structure for your system is. If these are present, then it works. And the multinational corporations use this. So Toyota actually was using core design principles before we even know what it was, because they're one of the happiest corporations in the world. Like, does that mean no conflict? No, there's conflict. There's always going to be conflict. That's just a fact of life. And Ben & Jerry's ice cream also uses core design principles, and they're more of a egalitarian model. The world's longest running commune, I think it's the Jackrabbit commune, I could be wrong there, don't quote me, it uses core design principles, governmental organizations, schools. And like, we have this knowledge, we have this skill, but we're not talking about it, we're not teaching about it. We're just falling back into the old patterns of, well, this is what works, so this is how it is. And that goes back to the root behind the root behind the pathology paradigm, which is the attitude or the value set of supremacism, of one group is supreme or has control over another. And really that's the problem, is that we've got a supremacist problem. And it starts with, what I'm doing coercive? Yes or no? Okay. Now, can we go through the process of identifying whether what I'm doing is socially valid? And just repeatedly questioning ourselves. Oh, wait, don't we have a term for that? Philosophical doubt?
But then you also have to think about, what is those social norms? Who comes up with them? And how do you know that your social norms kind of match what your clients are trying for, if they are maybe non-speaking, or, it can be really tough sometimes, especially if you are working in a group that you don't necessarily have the same background with.
I don't know if anybody here has followed the Open Future page on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, any of those, but they do some amazing posts comedically to talk about this. And to kind of go into it. And they focus a lot on intellectual disability and advocating for that group. But at the same time, like, it's not exclusively them. Mm-hmm. And Open Future just kind of points out with that comedic gotchas.
I do know that group. Yeah. They're like spot on in their approach. Yes.
They would be what I would describe as the neurodiversity paradigm in practice, what they're doing. Or if you want to be even broader, like the functional contextualist paradigm, because ultimately behavior analysts, we are functional contextualists. Some would argue with me on that, but like, we look at the function of the behavior within its context, and we try to understand how behavior functions. So when we're using terms like aberrant, abnormal, atypical, those are pathology paradigm terms. Yeah. If we shift our behavior away from problem behavior towards a behavior of concern, that gives us in the context, because it is concerning. Or perhaps it's behavior of note. I don't target vocal protest for reduction. I target communication. Mm-hmm. But vocal protest is a behavior of note for me. And so while I'm working on communication skills, I am tracking it, because I want to see if we see a reduction naturally as an independent variable as we're teaching the communication skills, because that's okay. But I'll tell you right now, one of my favorite examples of a functional contextualist approach for an AAC learner was my friend who was working with this client, and she told me about this, and it was so exciting because the client was not protesting using her AAC when her sibling got in her space. Like, her sibling was getting in her face, and she was engaging in, like, vocal protests, and that was the problem. And so this behavior analyst, she sat down, she observed the family, and she realized, oh, I know what's wrong. And you know what she added to the AAC?
Swears.
Stop it, bitch. Back off, bitch. and you know what? They did have a period of time where it was a lot of that. Yeah. And because it was like, this is funny, I'm going to do this. But then very, very quickly, it faded to only using it when she wanted to, when she needed to. And then she started using the I need a break button. She started using the leave me alone button. She started like using all those other things. But I had to start with, hey, what's their family's community like? Because their family swears at each other, right? So back off, bitch is perfectly appropriate.
Oh, well, I think that's a great segue to go into the last section, dissemination station, which we've sort of been doing throughout the panel, but we can't have an episode without a sound effect. Oh, there we go. Great. So we've talked about a lot of subjects. You know, we so appreciate all three of you being able to share so much about your professional experiences, your personal experiences, and how that has sort of changed how you practice and how you help others to practice for the benefit of other members of the neurodivergent communities. If you had, so this is a soundbite time, I guess. So we talked about supervision, we talked about the field as a whole. If you just could grab any BCBA in the world, let's say, and say, hey, I'm going to tell you one thing real quick. And then they'd say, oh my goodness, that's the thing I needed to hear about neurodiversity, about working in this field, about doing a better job. And you only have a brief moment to do it, because then they're going to teleport away or whatever in this magical scenario I've now created. What is that one thing that you would say?
Listen to the community, listen to autistic people, listen to people that have gone through ABA, are autistic practitioners, or even those that are completely against it, and listen and learn from that and research based on that, and, do your own research, come up with your own feelings on ABA. Don't just say it sucks as a whole.
I think part of my kind of part of my point kind of goes in with that, like, with listening, what you said, Michelle, about presence. I think, being present is just so important, and not only with your clients, but with coworkers as well. With clients, like putting down the data. I know obviously we need to collect data and stuff, but I know like putting just it down for a minute and just watching the STEM or watching them engaging with that highly reinforcing event or object, and just appreciating that. And seeing how, one of the biggest things I took away from my last job was like what I learned from the clients I worked with, and I'd say the number one thing is presence, like being able to be more present with myself because I'm being present with the clients, and then that presence kind of radiating with the people I work with. And in terms of like, again, the field can get stressful, it can wear you down, but when you're able to just like really grasp onto those like those moments of presence, I think it's something that needs to be emphasized more, and it's something I really value about, again, what I've learned from my clients.
Because in this scenario, I have very limited amounts of time and I'm a windbag, I will tell people to subscribe to the Functional Contextualist newsletter on LinkedIn, which I just linked in the chat, so you have the link for it, and start with the very first article that's published, which is co-authored by myself and Summer Mingo, my dear friend, titled Beyond the Divide, Understanding and Addressing the Root Concerns Behind ABA's Abuse. And then following it through, because each article has been written with the perspective of trying to build off of and help to create a better understanding of what we as a field are doing wrong and how we can do better. I also recommend reading the article, They Have a Voice, Are We Listening?, which was published in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, and goes into, again, a lot of those root concerns that are covered in my article. And actually, Joseph and I are working on a chapter in a book together, along with a bunch of other people. Hopefully, it should be published. That book should be published soon, because we want to help move our field forward.
Yeah, that's a great article. Veneziano and Shea.
Well, Thank you all so much, Michelle LaFrance, Alex Astrella, and Brian Middleton. Thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing your experiences, your professional and personal experiences, for being so open with discussion. Brian, certainly we're huge fans. I mean, you've been on the show before. We're huge fans of links and articles and books.
We go way
so
back.
they're all going on the Master ABA book club list. Some of the ones you put on there, we have on Amazon that we can kind of pick from as we go. And links are always good. But if folks are listening and they do want to either kind of reach out and either kind of share information with you or ask questions, would folks be comfortable sharing contact information like emails or homes online, anything like that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Not your
I just
actual
want to say,
address. Yeah.
Yeah, not like where you live or anything. I mean,
That's not
The last 4 digits.
yeah, Social Security, credit card numbers, you know.
I mean, if you want to bring me a sandwich, sure. But
Robert, I just want to say, like, props. Almost nobody gets my last name right. Like, so thank you for everyone says Astrella. So the fact that you got it, like, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Well, when you hear the preview come out, I didn't know at the time, so I did say it wrong, but I will say it right from now on.
No. I didn't notice. I was just so jazzed on that. But thank you for being honest. Yeah, no, people, if anyone wants to chat about behavior analysis, about documentary, about really anything, my Instagram is at alex.astrella, the same spelling of my last name. Facebook, same thing. And if you want to email me, alex@bluestarproductions.com. I'm sure the spelling that will be in the description somewhere.
Yep. And I'm not fancy, so I don't have a fancy email address or anything like that. It's just mrt.sing, SING, @gmail.com.
I mean, that's pretty fancy. At least you're not using Hotmail.
This is true. Yep.
Right? So you're really you're there.
Your GeoCities page
high school, so it's all good.
For me, myself, and I, do not email me. I'm really bad at email. Please don't. I'm still trying to work through that stinking inbox, and I got too many of them. But you can definitely reach out to me on any of my social media pages, except for Twitter. I'm not. I basically I haven't shut that account down because there's good stuff on there, but I am not using it anymore. But
Hot mess over there.
Also, I don't check Reddit as religiously as I should, so maybe not that one. But LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads are all places where I pretty regularly check and reply to messages. So by all means, feel free to reach out and ask questions and comment. And I love a good, healthy debate and discussion, just as long as we can be respectful and we're not going for gotchas.
Was it Bearded Behaviorist at all locations?
Yep, it's at Bearded Behaviorist.
And now that we've said a big thank you to our guests, let's move to the last section of our show, pairings. Diana, tell us about pairings.
Oh, sure. So pairings is a section of the show where I tell you about other episodes you might want to go back and check out if you liked this one. So oh my gosh, I kept listing more and more and more as we were talking during this episode because there's so many that this topic relates back to, but I did try to whittle my selections down to the ones that might be of most pressing revisitation. So those include episode 134, where we originally talked to Brian Middleton about trauma-informed care. Also, as we already referenced, episode 268 is the one that we did most recently about a discussion on neurodiversity. At the end of that episode, we said, and if any autistic BCBAs want to come join us, reach out. And so these were the folks who had reached out to us, in case that was unclear when we first started this episode. We also referenced the work of D2 Rashiraman and Jen Austin, and they came on in episode 204 to talk about applications of trauma-informed care, and the enhanced choice model is discussed in that episode. In episode 90, we talked about social validity. In episode 270, we talked about social validity again. We also talked about incorporating unique interest with Tamika Meadows in episode 160. And recently in episode 271, we discussed social justice research practices with Dr. Malika Pritchett. And that was the episode in which she gave that amazing table, which did a review on ethics in the field since its inception to now, which I just really love. And then we've had 2 book clubs, episode 101, where we talked about neurotribes, and episode 1004, where we talked about the book Look Me in the Eye, both of which may be of relevance for today. And as a last part of pairings, I like to recommend a snack that you could listen to. And so when we came on, Rob's like, well, it's a panel. So it's like being in a panel room that's paneled. So it's like being in your like mom's paneled basement, and you can like hang out down there and like watch TV and movies and stuff like that. And so what kind of snacks would you have? So Rob said he would like to eat Cheetos and that
Crunchy Cheetos.
Oh, specifically crunchy Cheetos in that setting. And I said, you know what's really good? Popcorn, when you like toss in the M&Ms into the popcorn. So it's like mixed together. You can disagree, I suppose, if you want to, but I also feel like that is nice because it is a heterogeneous mix that really contributes to being a better whole, and that's what this episode is about.
Wow, Dinah, your metaphor diet. I should really give that a try.
Yeah. Pairings.
One more time, we want to say a big thank you to Michelle LaFrance, Alex Astrella, and Brian Middleton for coming on and being our neurodiversity panel for our discussion today. This episode definitely could not have happened without them, and we were really excited to have this time to listen and to hear their perspectives. So thank you to all of them very much. We also want to say thank you to all of our listeners out there. If you have not, please rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you like to get podcasts. Please subscribe to the show. You can visit our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to our previous episodes, links to some of the books that Brian mentioned, and to learn a little bit more about our speakers, as well as all of our previous episodes. And if you want even more ABA Inside Track content, including a chance to vote on some of our upcoming content, including our book club episodes for the 2024-2025 year, head on over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can subscribe at whatever level you like. However, if you subscribe at the $5 and then $10 levels, you're able to gain access to CEs for our listener choice and for our book club episodes for no additional cost, as well as discounts for other CEs. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And finally, some big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. Oh, and I bet you thought I forgot it, but no, I've got your second secret code word thought of by our guests, and that code word is Scotty, SCOTTY, as in beam me up, Scotty, from Star Trek. Y'all remember Scotty? That's played by James Doohan? No? Well, whatever. Just type in Scotty, SCOTTY.
I don't think you want me to do more Scottish accents.
I want you to go, hello, computer. All right.
Debbie Wales here.
Yeah, he does say that. Our Star Trek 4 episode will be coming out later this summer, I think. All right, folks. Thank you again so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.